Hi, everybody. I'm here to add a little bit of context to this week's reading. We're diving into quantitative research this week, and we don't have much time to do it, so I'd like to put a frame around what you're reading this week. The three concepts that I'd really like you to pay attention to, I think would be helpful, is sampling, measurement, and validity. In the Shepherd's book, this book, the authors also dive into several different models of quantitative design between groups and repeated measures and things like that. And I urge you not to get bogged down in those details because for me that comes after questions of validity. But we'll get to that in a minute. So let's dive right in. So again, we come back to this idea of how do we judge research? How do we know if it's okay to base our clinical practice off of? How do we know if we're doing it right if we are conducting research? So one thing I'd like to bring your attention to is the rubric from the class that the person who designed the course wrote. I think that it offers a valuable way to look at judging research. So where did that go? Woo. There it is. So here's the rubric that she wrote. And this is on our Sakai site, and I want everyone to definitely look at it if you haven't already. We've got style, we've got, here we go, components of the proposal. So many of you are now well on your way to being done with this portion and this portion in some cases. But now we're really going to dip down into the methods section. So you'll see that the ways that I'm going to look at your proposals that you turn in at the end of the semester is how do you talk about sampling? How do you talk about measuring? How do you talk about procedures and design? And there's this other bit about the other elements, but I'm not going to talk about those today. So you can start to see that even in this little assignment, not little, this big assignment that we're doing this semester, sampling and measurement really come up as really important pieces. Why is that? Because the way that you sample and the way that you measure determines whether or not your study is valid. Ooh. What is happening? Nope. There we go. So let's go. The design, the question, the guiding question here is the design well suited to the research question? Now this week we're really very focused on experimental design, and then survey research is on the side, but that's not what this video is about. So that's the first question to ask yourself when you're reading an article is does the design make sense? For sampling, is it okay to generalize from the sample to a larger population? Why or why not? And this is a really common and important question that I feel like we don't ask. But a lot of articles I come across make these generalizing statements when I don't think that they really have the methodological basis to do so. That has something to do with sample size, but not just sample size. It's also about one of the key features of this week's reading, which is randomization. More about that in a minute. The measures, are they reliable and valid? Do they measure what they think they're measuring, and do you get stable results over time? Now, the MFTs this week have more context around measurement. The reading that you guys are doing in this book does a really fantastic job of talking about measurement. So this will be repeat for MFTs, but I don't see it so clearly in the Shepherd's. So measurement is not just about which scale are you using. It's about how are you defining your constructs. Now, as a consumer of research, this is where our critical eye really comes in. Does it make sense to us the way that these people are defining their terms? I think sometimes, at least for me, I can get sort of easily swayed by the academic jargon and the polished look of a research article. But I think it's still important to really ask these basic questions of, does it make sense what they're talking about? They're talking about a construct of happiness, but what it really sounds like they're describing is agreeableness. And those are two different things to me. These are the kinds of questions that come up around constructs. Operationalizing, that's how are they going to put that idea on the ground so they can measure it. Now, often in our field, we get measurement that's really, really, really heavy on self-report. We ask these people, how did you feel over the last week? And this is what they said. We don't have nearly enough research that's based on observational measurement or dyadic measurement. That is, asking two partners in a relationship, how did your partner do over the last week? And then asking the partner, how did the other partner do? So getting scores about other people from within the system. We don't have nearly enough of that. I bring that up because self-report measures, while valuable, present possible weakness to a study. Because as we all know, as therapists and counselors, some people are not really all that self-aware. Some people don't report accurately or sometimes even honestly. So that self-report, as if a study is relying solely on that, that is somewhere that you would critique, possibly. It's a question. Likewise, if a study is completely observational and doesn't really ask for the participants' take on anything at all, I think that's something to wonder about as well. Social desirability comes into play with measurement if, and this has to do with procedures as well. Are the procedures adequate? So say you're measuring through an interviewing process, but if you don't like the way the person's answering, you give them an electric shock. This is a really extreme example, but that would be a procedure that would really invalidate the measurement system, right? It's like social desirability on steroids. The person is compelled to answer a certain way. But social desirability can be at play in really subtle ways, just in the way that we ask questions, the way that things are worded on a survey, as you guys will read, can really lead people to answer the way they think the researcher wants them to answer. And that would be a hit on the study's validity. So, still on the theme of judging research, you look at the design, and we learned this week that there's these three broad categories of experimental design. In true experimental design, there's a control group where nothing happens, and a treatment group where the thing happens. And people are randomly assigned to either of those groups. They're both randomly selected as participants, and then they're randomly assigned to groups. Quasi-experimental means that you have groups, different groups, comparison groups, but there's really no randomization. And there might not be a true control group either. Something might be happening in both groups, but just differently. Pre-experimental means there's just one group. And obviously there's no randomization because there's only one group. In our field, we get a lot of this kind, the quasi-experimental. And you can probably guess why, is that you can't really recruit people to be into a study that's about mental health and therapy and say, we're not going to give you any treatment. You can do a waiting list group, but some people find that to be unethical when the wait is there purely for research purposes. So what's more typical is that you have one group that's treatment as usual and one group that is the special intervention, whatever it is you're trying to study. I'm going to pause here because the files get really big. So this is part one, and then I will pick up continuing on with quasi-experimental in a moment.